Yo, everybody. Welcome to Off Panel, a weekly interview podcast about all things comics, brought to you by Sketch.com. I'm your host, David Harper, and this week's guest is the owner and general manager of Bosco's Comics, Cards, and Games, my very own local comic shop here in Anchorage, Alaska. It's John Weddleton. Thanks for coming on, John.
Hi, good to be here. I just want to make clear that general manager means I generally let the managers do all the work.
Well, that's important. You know where your strengths lie, and that is in the people who do this every single day.
Well, I have an absolutely amazing and unexpected position, and that is with two store managers that have been with me over 25 years. Pat in the sports card department, who's been here that long. Carl, we were his first job when he was 17, and he's in his 40s now. And, you know, when you have people been around that long, they know how to do everything, certainly way better than I ever knew how.
Yeah.
And they do it. And it's incredible. And the stores run great. And I kind of say I'm there just to stir the stew.
The funny thing is I go in most every Wednesday. I'll be going in. We're recording this on a Wednesday, so I'll be going in probably after this podcast. And the funny thing is even though I only buy comics now, I still go in and buy my comics from Pat, who runs the sports cards department, because he was my boss in high school when I worked at Bosco's for a summer. So the nice thing is like that, having that familiarity, at least with the managers and a lot of the employees, to be honest, it breeds a sense of community. Like, I go to talk to Pat because at this point, Pat is my friend, and I just chat with him because of it.
Yeah, that happens, you know, and it's incredible after, you know, it's been around 36 years plus, and, you know, seeing gray-haired guys that I knew as kids bringing their kids in who are, you know, bringing their kids in, you know, and it blows me away, you know, that we're in that situation as a business. It's pretty incredible.
Well, I want to start, this is the 275th episode of my podcast. Because I'm a comic fan, I always like to do special episodes on 25, 50, 75, 100, etc. because that's how Marvel Comics trained me when I was a kid. And I always wanted to have you on the shop because, in a weird way, Bosco's is kind of a character in this podcast because you're who I buy comics from. And the weird thing is as I researched this, I learned two things that I didn't know. First, Bosco started in 1984, which was the year I was born, and that you weren't the one who opened it. For some reason, I always thought it was you, but Randy Remuglia was the person who started initially in 1984 after opening the comic shop in Fairbanks, and you bought into it and became a co-owner in 1987. And I want to start there. Like, what made you want to own a comic shop?
You know, nothing ever, actually. Some of the best things in life just kind of happen. I had met Randy. I moved to Alaska from New Orleans in 1980. I visited in 81 after college. I did a motorcycle trip around the country, came up here, and thought, well, I'll come back. Went back to New Orleans, worked for a year to make money, and came back. And I had totally expected to live in Anchorage because I'd always lived in large towns of millions, you know. But when I got there, I visited a friend in Fairbanks, and the state was booming. And he said, if you want a roof over your head, you better rent that cabin out on Rosa Creek Road. So I said, okay, I'll stay in Fairbanks, and rented this cabin. It was a dry cabin heated with wood, and that started 5 years in Fairbanks. And I had an undergraduate degree in economics, so I thought I'm going to be an economist, you know. So I just thought, well, okay, I'm going to go and I'll just meet all the economists in town, you know, and that took, morning, maybe a little bit after lunch. And one was Randy, and he was working at a huge international consulting firm, and I just met him, and we talked, and he was a crazy guy. He said, no, don't get a job. He says, John, you just go look in the paper, and there's requests for proposals, and they ask for studies to be done. Just get a team and do that. And I thought, what? You can't do that. That's nuts. I got a bachelor's degree, you know. I just got out of college. And but I did it anyway. And sure enough, it worked. You know, the first one, you know, people thought it was crazy, you know. But I met people, and then another one came up and almost got it, but his company got it. So when they got it, they go, well, now what are you going to do? We need someone to do the work. So they hired me to do it. So I worked at this company, sort of not side by side with Randy, but, you know, same company for a little while, and we got to know each other a little bit. So when he got sick of it in 83, bought the comic shop in Fairbanks, yeah, which had been there. A guy, famous artist, Alaska artist, Dave Mollett owned it, and Randy bought it from him and worked it for a while. But the real money was in Anchorage, much bigger city. So he loaded a bunch of comics in this beat up old Dodge Ram van that had the shifter was 3 in the tree, up there on the stem. And but the shifter was broken, so it was like 2 inches long. You could barely get it into gear. It was always a struggle. And it was the funniest thing, and he drove it down to Anchorage. And, then Alaska was booming then, and people wanted to him. You got this hippie-looking guy with a van load of comics. I mean, it's a joke, right? This isn't real business. So they wouldn't rent to him. So he talked a shoe repair store guy on Spenard Road into sharing his space. So Randy had 300 square feet in a shoe repair store. And he just stuck up a sign, I think you've probably seen the Captain America cutouts.
Yeah.
Stuck those by the door, and people came. And he is a remarkable salesman. He is so focused on customers and getting what they want. It just grew. And he moved to the end of the mall that little building was attached to, and was there, it's about 2.5 years longer. And then I showed up in 87.
Mm-hmm.
And I showed up because the economy had crashed by then. And there was no work for an economist, no consulting projects. I was teaching a class at the UAF, and that got canceled just because of budget cuts, and broke up with a girlfriend. And it's like there was nothing holding me in Fairbanks. But Randy would call me every 6 months, say, "John, you got to come help me." And I said, "Okay, I'll come down." And I just expected to be there till I found a real job. And that was 1987, and I'm still there. And Randy's moved on, and it's been actually an amazing gig. So it was never planned. It just happened, and it's been tremendous.
That's amazing. Well, I mean, so Randy reached out to you. You guys are kindred spirits. You guys both had similar backgrounds, and he was the wild man. What made you? Were you a fan of comics and games or anything else like that before then?
No, and I had somehow knew the characters, and I don't remember ever being a comic reader, but I knew the characters. And I just think, I worked on tugboats in college, and you'd have stacks of Playboys and Penthouse and comics in every bunk room. Mm-hmm. And I think I flipped through these comics, the boat, so I got to know some of the characters, but I never considered myself, comic or reader or game player or card collector, So now I do, I read. I don't have time to read much, unfortunately, but there's some great comics out there, and I have a very small card collection that's has no value to anyone but me.
Right.
But it's it's someone I've met, or just something appeals to me about a character. So it's I have cards that relate to something that was important to me. Mm-hmm. I have some. 2 cards signed by some women who played in the women's league back in the 40s, and I have cards. I got really into the Negro League for a while, and kind of read some books and made actually a nice display I set up once in a while. So I have some cards, from Negro League players of a variety of types, and then some big, I have some no value Babe Ruth card, but Babe Ruth's pretty cool.
Yeah, yeah.
I have that. It's not for value. It's just because I just think it's cool, And I think that's the best way to collect, Just collect stuff that you think is cool. And if it becomes valuable, that's nice. But, if it doesn't, you've lost nothing. You have something cool.
Yeah, that's the funny thing. So I have a spinner rack in my house, in my home office. And the funny thing is if somebody else looked at it, they would probably think that it was a spinner rack of a crazy person. But for me, every single one of those comics has a story behind it. And it's like I have MODOK's first appearance, and hilariously enough, MODOK. Actually, I bought it at like when Bosco's acquired a collection last year. Everyone else was bidding on giant size X-Men, and I was like, I want that MODOK first appearance. And the funny thing is now MODOK's getting a TV show because every comic character will eventually get a TV show. But that is one thing that's really great about all this fandom stuff is that it's part. Like you're part of a larger story, but it's also part that all these different things connect to your personal story. And I think that's probably part of the reason why, like, so many people stay with that type of fandom for so long. It's just like people, love these things. It reminds them of their youth, but also it carries on forward.
Yeah, it's it's interesting. They do say that these things go in 20-year cycles. So you collect as a kid, and then we used to say our biggest competition was girls and cars, and you have these kids collecting, and then they got a car, and all their money went into that, and then they discover girls, money goes into that, and then they come back when they discover I can have all these things: cars, girls, and they collect their cards, and they come back. But it is somewhat regaining. I think it used to be more, but now comics are for all ages. I mean, and obviously it used to be all boys, and now it's a good mix. Male and female, and it's an incredible time to be a comic reader.
Absolutely. Well, it's funny because I actually had a patron that asked me, I have a Patreon for my podcast where people can kind of support the podcast and everything. And one of the questions I had was, he was curious about what your favorite comic and or run is. Is there like anything in particular that is like a personal favorite over the years from you?
One it goes back, and I don't remember the exact issues, but it's like Grendel. When I do talks on comics, I have these with me, and it's just 2 issues. And it's not really so much in the Grendel storyline, but it's the way it tells the story. And it's these 2 issues have just vertical panels in them, and I think it's like 6 or 7 across. And it tells at the top, it's kind of the writer describing the story. And then you have the vertical panels, fairly narrow, which is, of course, the artist's interpretation, right? Then at the bottom, it has in the script what this main character thinks of himself.
Mm-hmm.
So the top would say, and I can't remember the guy's name, but, so walks into this sleazy bar. He's looking disheveled from a late night drinking, and you get the picture of this. And at the bottom is like, he thinks he's a real happening, slick guy, going into this bar, it's like, and you go through it. It's just interesting because only comics can do it that way.
Yeah.
Where you have 3 different viewpoints simultaneously following through this story. And of course, they're telling the same story. They blend a little bit now and then. And there's of course word balloons when words are said that are in there with the pictures. And, it's just fascinating the way the story was told. Using the comic techniques is incredible. Another one is Persepolis, which is kind of similar. She wrote an amazing story from the heart that I think is a tremendous personal story. It talks about adolescence that I think, I think young women, it probably speaks more loudly, but even as males, it's fascinating. When I was that age, actually, I lived in Turkey, so I was kind of the kind of Iranian, Persian and Iranian revolution is very close to it. So I kind of relate to that and some of the symbolism. Mm-hmm. And, she did the art and everything, and there's some panels in there where it's just incredible. It's like, and I do these talks, used to do it a lot, but for librarians, Understanding Comics Light, I call it.
Yeah.
And, kind of going through, and we brought Scott McCloud up here once. I hope you got a chance to see him.
I went. It was great.
For the country. Yeah, and he said, I told him about my Scott McCloud Light, and he said, that's okay. He said, you could keep doing it, but there's nothing like what he does. But he has different kinds. He talks about the storytelling techniques, and he talks about kind of like a non sequitur panel. And she does this one page. It's amazing. Is that you see these, boys being blown up at the front line of the war with Iraq, and they're just like this explosion in these bodies, contorted in the air, and the panel right below it is people dancing in their apartment,
mm-hmm.
and it was just incredible. It's so powerful because the match of the layout is there, and it's incredible, and I don't know how you do that in any other storytelling format,
Yeah.
So that one, there's others too, but those 2 I carry those with me when I do presentations on comics because they just work. So it just shows that an example of why are comics special, and that's why.
I think the thing that's both of those books are a great example as to how, you said you're doing your Understanding Comics Light, but those are a great example as to how some people still think of comics as just superheroes. But, Persepolis is a great example of it. That was a graphic novel that ended up becoming, I think it was an Academy Award winning animated film. I don't remember. Did it win it? I'm trying to remember. But either way, like the evolution of comics, because I remember like the first comic that really taught me that there was stuff outside of superhero comics was I was 7 when Bone came out, Jeff Smith's Bone. And I remember that Bosco's was one of the shops that actually carried it, because I recently talked to Jeff Smith, and it was funny because he was really impressed that a shop from Alaska actually had early copies of Bone. And anyways, it's really interesting to see how something went from like a self-published book like that, like Bone, all the way up to Persepolis, where not only is it published, but it like connects with people like you, and it connects with people around the world, and becomes a movie, and et cetera, et cetera. And now, like something like Persepolis, I'm not seeing that quality, but that type of storytelling is the norm. You can find different types of stories for different audiences in comics everywhere. And actually, I do want to give you credit. You guys carry everything, which is, in terms of comics, you carry everything, which is always really exciting, because Alaska does not have a lot of options for comic shopping.
No, we, there's, you can't, if you only do the top sellers, then you are slowly shrinking what you're going to carry, and your market's going to shrink. You won't see these amazing things going on. Something's going to happen, and you're going to miss it. So it's, I kind of explain it to my staff. It's research and development. You're going to try that because it's so weird and unusual, because maybe that's what clicks, and, look at Magic the Gathering. That's a big part of our business too. Mm-hmm. And when it came out, back, I guess, 94 or whatever, people came in and they saying, do you guys have magic? And what did we think? We think like magic trick kind of stuff. We go, well, we don't really carry that. We could, we'll carry whatever people ask for, We start researching it and figured it out pretty quick what it was, and figured out how to get it, And, you just got to try, put it on the shelf, see what people do, and they rack it great, and just repeat, And but you have to try and be experimental. And mostly, too, that's the kind of stuff I really like. I will go through and read some of the mainstream comics. I like Spider-Man, and I like keeping up with Batman, but some of it's just a little too gruesome and spooky for me. I'm looking for a happier escape.
Yeah.
But I like to know what's going on and then Superman and stuff too. But little Iron Man I might read. It's kind of flip. I don't have time to read enough to maintain the continuity though.
Oh yeah.
So I get lost a lot of times, with Empire. So I don't know what's going on with that. I can't keep up.
Yeah, sometimes being a comic fan is like a full-time job. But I do want to. Go ahead.
Well, I should have forgot. Strangers in Paradise.
Oh yeah, I was going to say I thought you were a Terry Moore fan.
Yeah, so I try to read his stuff, and I know he's got a new one fairly recent that I haven't read, but and that is, I think, the amazing character development that he does, and then the pacing of the story too. Where it's not fast, until all of a sudden he ties it to everything together, and you go, whoa, that was cool, and then it slows down. But it's his art's fine, and his writing, and then the Concrete series, which is no more, but I really like those too. There's something about that really grabbed me.
Mm-hmm. Well, going back, you joined up in 1987. I think you said February 1987, and it was interesting because that was kind of right before Bosco's really expanded quickly. Like there was, Spinard Bosco's, which is the we'll call B1 from here because that's what you guys call it. It expanded in 1988. It expanded into a bigger space in 1987 and added sports cards. It expanded again in 1988. And then there was like the second Bosco's location, or B2, that opened in Diamond Center, which is a mall here in Anchorage. B1 expanded even further in 1990. And then in 1991, you guys added a third location at Eagle River. And it's interesting that you came and then that happened. Was that something you were eager to do, or was it just because I don't think people really realize how insane that time was for popularity of comics. Like, particularly comics and sports cards, actually, they were exploding at that point. So was it because of that environment, or is it because you were eager to do that?
It's a combination. I think the environment let us do it and made it work, and we responded to it. It also, the one store wasn't making enough money to feed me and Randy.
Oh, sure.
So we needed. but you kind of, when you're in a market like that, you ebb and flow with it, So we grew. I mean, within a couple months of me coming to Anchorage, we moved across the street to a larger space. And over the years, we knocked down walls and expanded in that building, just consistently. And then we knew, well, we should get, South Anchorage didn't have anything. Let's try a mall. And so we've probably been in 7 or 8 different spots in that mall at this point, and very, very small spot to start out with because it was expensive. But it worked. It took on its own. We tried to replicate the Spenard store initially, but that didn't really work. The mall environment's a little different. So as you know, it's kind of taken on more of the pop culture side. We don't do floppies there. You have
right.
one of those spin rack, kind of all ages floppies and graphic novels and stuff. It's just a different market. They sell a lot of the novelty stuff more than the comic stuff. And they sell very few sports cards and so on. So it was kind of a nice move. It's a little bit different. And it can really boom at Christmas, kind of the mall thing, so that was nice. And when kind of mass, broadly popular pop culture things happen, like when Pokemon did, it actually hit the mall store more than the Spenard store, because that's where everyone was, So when Pokemon hit, we opened up a kiosk just to sell Pokemon in the mall, and it expanded there. So it's a different. It was good to do that, and Eagle River was different too. It was a great store and got a lot of people in there, but they didn't spend much. That's the problem. So after, I don't know, it was probably a dozen years, we finally, it just wasn't working well enough. So we had to shut it down, which was sad because we had a lot of customers there. It just wasn't penciling out at all. So.
It's funny because the person who has appeared on my podcast the most, I've had a lot of comic book creators, I've had a lot of different people, and one of the most frequently requested guests on my show is Brandon Burpee, who used to shop at Bosco's also. He first started buying comics from Bosco's at the Eagle River store. And
yeah.
it is funny because, like, I bet a lot of the people, and one of the things I have a hard time remembering is whether or not there were any other shops, because I know A1 came at a certain point, but for somebody like Brandon, when Eagle River went away, he was already at Bosco's customers, so he just started shopping at the Spenard store. And so I imagine you saw a lot of those people migrate over to the Spenard store from there.
Yeah, you would. I think that was part of the issue is most of them already shopped at the Spenard store. So they went to the Eagle River store just to fill in or just to hang out. So, and that was kind of, we know Sonora customers and we were seeing that dynamic. So the non-crossover customers tended to be more people from the Valley would go to the Eagle River store.
Sure.
And, there's some we always think, should we open something up in the Valley? And I'm just not quite prepared to do that.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Maybe someday.
Well, I was thinking about it, and I was thinking of my memories of Bosco's, and one of my favorite ones from Bosco's was actually the Diamond Store. It was when Superman died, and you guys had a parade celebrating Superman's life at the Diamond Center, and it's funny. What's that?
It was a wake. It was like that was so much fun.
It was, but the funny thing is like I vividly remember that, and I was 8. I think something like that, or 8 or 9. And I remember walking through the mall and there was kazoos involved and it was just this big celebration. And it's funny because when I look back on it, it feels like events, whether you're talking about Free Comic Book Day or that, or like all the stuff you guys do in the extra room at Spenard, it feels like events have always been an important part of Bosco's. Is that something that's always been an important part of what you've been trying to do there?
For a long enough time that always probably sounds right. It wasn't in the early years. We were just struggling to figure out how to run stores and, keep product on there. But I would say for this century, the last 20 years, more and more so. And partly they're just fun, and they, you get attention, you get the press in and stuff like that. But it's just fun to do it. And that Superman wake was such a blast because it's just, it's almost like you were saying, how you go for a run to clear your head. Well, I run too, I used to bike a lot. And you get out there and the mind opens up and I think about these things. I go, hey, we should do that. So the wake was very choreographed, actually. Like we had a speaker, who was doing a eulogy. and he would mention things, and we had actors in the crowd who go, "Oh, I remember that. That was me. I was there." And right, and then he'd go on and he'd say more, and someone else would go, "I was there," or whatever. He did that for me too, And it's so unexpected to the crowd. And it was just so much fun. So a lot of stuff like that, and of course, you look at Free Comic Book Day, which I think everywhere is big, and stuff we have there, the East High Jazz Band, the 501st, Carrie Lord's group with the cosplay, and everything to having sidewalk chalk out for kids, and it's just fun doing that stuff, having these big events.
Well, and I remember the funny thing about that parade, or the wake, is I remember when we did the parade, I remember people just like randomly joining in, and I don't even know if they knew what was going on, but it is interesting. I'm doing this piece on comics marketing right now, and one of the interesting things is like, I feel like events and those types of things are good at attracting people who might be interested but don't really know about it otherwise. That was the interesting thing about the Superman story, is it was such a big deal that everyone was talking about it, not just comic fans. And doing something like that is a really great way to hone in people's attention that they might miss otherwise.
Yeah, and they've learned from that, because that was one. But you can see recently there's been other big events, the big events, and it draws in people who aren't regular comic readers. And, you hear some complaints, I think, in the industry, well, they come in and then that's it. They're in for one issue and then they go. But to me, that's okay. So if I lose 95% of them, never come back. Okay. Mm-hmm. But I just got 5%, and all of those people got to see my store and look through it and walk around. If we do our job well, we give them a quick tour, and get them to look around. And they see we're not just comics or cards or games, all this other stuff too. And maybe they come back, they have a friend who's a relative who's a comic reader or something into pop culture. And Christmas time or birthday time, they come back. So, it seems like there's debate on whether or not that stuff is good for the business to do these big, event things that draw in kind of where citizens or whatever. And I'm all for it. It's our job to figure out how to make something out of it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, and I also think, tying into all these things that we've been talking about, I think that one thing that has always struck me about Bosco's is that, one of my favorite random things is basically, for as long as I can remember, every time I walk into Bosco's, someone says, "Hey, Harper," as soon as I walk in. Like, not every time, but it's most of the time. And I don't even remember who it started with. I feel like it was Will, or maybe it was Jordan. But anyways, it ties into the fact that, like, these events and all these different things like that, like, community feels like it's an important part of what Bosco's was trying to do. Like I mentioned, Brandon. I met Brandon because of Bosco's, and he came to my wedding, and he comes on my podcast all the time. Is community an important part of what, especially in this century, is that an important part of what you're trying to do, and kind of giving people a space to embrace these things that they love?
A lot of that. I mean, you can see, we had a little, I don't like to call it a gaming space. We call it an event room or event space.
Sure.
And it was a small part at the old store, but in the new one, which has been 5.5 years, and kind of really wanted to have a bigger event space. And so the event space is big, but we can also swing open those overhead doors and shove fixtures out of the way and have super big events. And then on that north side of the building, we have that covered canopy. So we do geek swap meets, which are not a moneymaker for us, but it is just, that's our people,
Yeah.
And they're coming in, they're the boss, selling stuff, get to know each other, and, stuff in that events room, it's, for the gamers and things like that. But, I mean, you've been there on Thursdays for D&D night. I mean, it's incredible, and it's, people love it. And it's sad. It's that, now with COVID, it's essentially shut down.
Right.
And, it's frustrating. So we don't, we kind of lose some of those connections that, to try to figure out ways to replace that. But that's a real challenge now. It's a big loss for the, for the community, I think. But, Pandemics. What are you going to do?
Exactly. Yeah, and the thing is I think that's the type of thing though that after all of this, it's the type of thing that definitely brings people back because they miss that. They during a time like this, you start to recognize the things that are important to you, and maybe it's Thursday night D&D, or maybe it's. I mean, honestly, like I'm not gonna lie, you guys have acquired 2 collections of old comics in like the last year and a half or so, and you've had events for both of them. And I never thought that I was gonna be the type of person who would be like dying to go through old comics and like do silent auctions, but apparently I am exactly that type of person because both those times that happened, I was over the moon. And like you guys had that big space, and it was like the most recent one was during the pandemic, and you guys handled it perfectly. And it's just, I think those types of things are just really exciting. And anytime you can build, I mean, it goes back to Free Comic Book Day. Like you go to Free Comic Book Day, and like you're saying, if that type of event brings in a ton of new customers and only 5% come back, that's still 5% more than you had last time. And that's a huge difference.
Yeah. No, and that's a tremendous thing for any business. So, those auctions with the collections, we have been really fortunate with these collections. We got bought that one in Fairbanks last summer. That was just this quiet collector up there. He'd been up there for decades collecting comics, and he was sold his business, moving to lower 48, didn't want to take them with him. And I don't know if you noticed on the wall, we got 40 copies of Black Panther 3. For some reason, he had tons of them. But, it was an interesting mix. And then I think recently, this year, a couple, much smaller, but still very, very neat collections. It's nice to see those are coming out of the drawers in the garages and stuff.
Oh, yeah.
Back in the circular.
It had Incredible Hulk 181 in it, which is my dream comic. Unfortunately, apparently, I do not dream in the place that I have, or I don't dream in a tax bracket that I can participate in. That's okay though. But I was curious. So I remember back in the day, I'm trying to remember what con it was, but I remember Bosco's was at some event in Seattle. Maybe it was early Emerald City Comic Con or something. But I'm always interested in what your perspective is on like Bosco's versus shops in the lower 48. Like, do you think that there's any foundational differences to running a shop here versus maybe the conversations you have with other shop owners, or do you think it's largely the same?
There's obviously a lot of similarities. When I look, we are so diverse at Bosco's, with, kind of 3 main legs to the stool, but so much other stuff in the store too. We got with the games, role-playing games, card games and board games, and then comics and sports cards. And I think in the lower 48, the market is so much bigger from where most stores are that they can specialize. They can just be comics. They don't do games and other stuff. I mean, you see the combination often, but, just a comic shop anywhere in Alaska, I think would be challenged, or just a sports card shop. You could do well when things are going really well, but things slow down. Everything kind of goes up and down. And we've been very fortunate that when comics dropped, sports cards might have been strong or games were strong, and it got us through. So it'd be very, I'd be nervous not being diversified in our product lines like we are. And at lower 48, I go into shops that are just amazing. They're amazing comic shops. They only do comics, they specialize in it. Or, a game store. There's just games, and they're incredible. And in that product line, better than we are, because we're so blended, because we're blended. We don't have, but, here you really have to do more than one product line, I think, because the market's small.
Yeah. I mean, that's actually, I'm friends with a lot of retailers, people who own comic shops and everything. And the funny thing is when I talk to them about Bosco's, they're always blown away by how many product lines you represent. There's some shops that are like yours, like Third Eye Comics over on the East Coast in like Annapolis, Maryland. And I think they have 4 locations now, but they have everything. And not sports cards, but they have most everything else. And, Bosco's, you have comics, you have sports cards, you have magic cards, you have games, you have, and Pokemon cards, and et cetera, et cetera. You have puzzles, you have toys, you have movies, everything. And I'm trying to remember, what was the old TV commercials where it's Bosco's has got it all? Was that it?
Yeah, that's pretty funny. It's funny, someone, the brother of Billy from that, when was that? That was 87, 88 or something. We made that super high tech commercial,
Mm-hmm.
And he said, "Oh, that's my brother. We got so much, taunting because of that commercial when we were kids."
That's hilarious. But I mean,
I
like,
told him, I said, "He's a cult hero now."
he's a cult hero.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean it's funny because like people remember those commercials from that period. I mean back then there wasn't as much local advertising as there might be now, but you remember those old commercials. But it's funny though because it's totally accurate. Like you talk to other shops and they just don't have as many product lines because they, like you said, they can specialize, and that makes a huge difference because it's like Bosco's is basically a one-stop shop nerd emporium in a lot of ways.
Yeah. That's yeah.
Well, I mean, I am interested if, like, are there any unique challenges Alaska presents? I have to imagine, because I know I'm friends with the owner of this shop in Israel, and he is, obviously shipping to Israel through Diamond is going to be problematic. Are there any unique challenges from that, or are those just kind of all things you've figured out throughout the years, so just come with the territory?
We are always looking for ways to cut the cost of shipping. For the comics, we air freight them up here. It's very expensive, but we want them on the same day everyone else gets them.
Right.
And we're willing to eat the cost, and we have been for our entire history. So, but it is expensive. And then getting other stuff up here, we kind of got it figured out, but the shipping cost is high. If we, I look at shops in lower 48 that, we are price competitive, certainly. I know in sports cards we're very, very competitive. I mean, we sell our comics, we don't discount them, but they're cover price. And but the shipping cost for us is definitely far more than most places. Probably less than it is for Israel. That's
Oh yeah,
that's got to be an incredible challenge for them. That's not the one. There was one from Israel that got an Eisner Award.
Yeah, Kamikaze. That's the one.
That was one. That was very impressive. Yeah.
Yeah, great shop. Really, really great. Jacob Sorelli is a great dude. And the interesting thing is, I mean, the thing that would blow you away about that is you would think that they would probably ship from Diamond UK because Diamond UK is closer. But they actually ship from Diamond US because it ends up being cheaper, which makes it even further for them to travel, which, I don't know. That stuff is just always kind of astonishing to me. But that is the magic of shipping. I guess it's just how it works.
Yeah.
I actually had a patron question about Alaska in specific because, we've never, it seems like a lot of the people who come up in comics that are from Alaska, like you have Dustin Weaver was from Eagle River, and he like has done some big like Avengers books and stuff like that, and Lucas Kettner and, a variety of other people. Is there a lot of people end up leaving, going down to Portland and things like that. But do you think there's anything about the Alaskan like comic book scene that separates it from other parts of the country?
I don't know. I think we probably can. I think we're seeing more creators up here. I mean, Tad Galush is up here and he stays busy.
Mm-hmm.
And I think his wife got a job up here. But, now that they do so much electronically, you can be anywhere.
Oh, yeah.
And he does stuff on a tablet and sends it around, and so I think the location is probably not so much an issue. I guess you get a community though, and I think places like Portland, there's a lot of creators, and they work with each other. It's nice in any industry to have people like you together. So, and we don't really have that so much, but we're getting it more. We have a big section of a wall that is just local creators, just try to help them out and get them some exposure. And that seems to be growing.
Yeah.
So and there was actually, and I'm sorry, I can't remember her name, but there's a woman who was living in Eagle River and doing art for Dark Horse for years. And we had never met her. She didn't come in the shop or anything. One day she came in and said, "Oh yeah, you guys want to sell my comic?" I said, "Sure." But she's been working for Dark Horse for years, living up here. And I think she did move to Portland or something eventually. So, but there are people here, and we like to, and we offer that wall space, get exposure. I mean, I'd love to see a bigger community grow here.
Well, and I know that Tad and people like Lucas Elliott and Lee Post were they were having kind of like hangout and draw nights over at the writer's block there for a while. Obviously that has changed since the pandemic and everything. But at the same time, it's like, I do think that type of community is growing. And, obviously Bosco's is a big part of it. But yeah, I mean, the perception still like lingers that Alaska is not part of the comic book scene. But like you said, it's like you can really work from anywhere. Like I know creators. I have a lot of friends in Ireland who work in comics, and you wouldn't think of Ireland as a huge hotspot, but now it is.
Right? Actually, Ireland's a natural.
You would?
You know, Ireland's a natural. Back in the Dark Ages, they had monks sitting in little caves copying the Bible. And I just see now it's comic creators sitting in little puddles drawing comics. So.
Daredevil is the modern day Book of Kells.
Years, David.
That's amazing. Well, I mentioned the product lines. You have all those different ones. Have you seen any significant shifts in like the interest in these product lines? Like, I was talking to Pat in Sports Cards again, and he was telling me about how during the pandemic there's been a huge influx of interest in sports cards, and it's really interesting to like learn things like that because like you don't really think about how people are shifting their thinking during a time like this, but people are pursuing nostalgia. People are really interested in like getting back to their roots or maybe collecting cards of their, favorite people because they can't take a trip. So I want a Zion Williamson rookie card instead. I mean, I guess what I'm asking is like, since, over these 33 years, like, do you see like real ups and downs and significant shifts in interest as you go along?
Absolutely. It's, in many regards, all of our product lines are boom and bust. I'm not so sure about board games because those are only been 5 or 6 years where we've been kind of growing that. But, you've seen, comics with Death of Superman was so huge. You had the 90s, and then it came crashing down, and then it slowly built up, and it dropped again. And we see, and back issues had really dropped. And now back issues are starting to pick back up. People are going back and getting the less expensive ones. And as you mentioned, the kind of the vintage marquee stuff has gotten really expensive now. So, comics have gone up and down. And sports cards are very much that way too, where they you just kind of roll along, not making much money, and all of a sudden something explodes. And it could be, the back with the home run derby or something like that, when Shaquille O'Neal came on the scene, people getting his cards and just drew everybody else in. And now the current boom in sports cards actually, looking at our sales, kind of started fall of last year, pre-pandemic. And then it continued to grow, and it really has just picked up like crazy this year, and which is super fortunate because we're in a pandemic.
Absolutely,
we're doing okay, But when the we started getting wind of the pandemic, sat down with the team and just brainstorm. What are we going to do?
Mm-hmm.
And I said we should be planning now. And I we don't know. It's my first pandemic, and I said we'll plan on 30% drop in sales. Don't order based on what you've been selling. Order based on people aren't going to have money, they're not going to be working, or they're not going to go outside. And so a lot of the stuff we did tighten up our orders substantially. But it turned out we didn't have to. I mean, things, we were closed for 5 weeks, and that hurt. But once we reopened, we got back to where we were pretty well. So that was it was tremendous. And a lot of it is because sports cards were just jumping. They're selling well in Alaska, Pat selling stuff to lower 48 for a lot of it. So it's amazing. It's just, we're lucky, but things do go up and down. I'll tell you a story.
Sure.
So you were collecting during the 90s boom, right? And the Valiant.
Remember
yeah.
Valiant? Oh, yeah.
And Valiant had really good comics. I enjoyed them. But there's also this real speculator, aspect to it where people were buying, 2, 3, 4, 5 of every issue, And it's growing and growing, and we're just selling comics like crazy. But this can't last, right? It's got to stop because it's boom bust. It's got to stop. Well, we got at our warehouse a pallet that was meant for someone in Hawaii. And we look, what is this pallet? It was an entire pallet of one issue of a Valiant comic. And we said, the boom is over. Yeah. People are doing that, ordering at that level. There is no scarcity in this world, and we dramatically cut our orders immediately because when things drop, they drop fast. Mm-hmm. And it was just dumb luck, that pallet showed up and opened our eyes, and we said, "Whoop, party's over." So, cause, and actually the guy who the pallet was for, by the time it came to us, and we figured out who it was and stuff, party was over. He didn't want the pallet. So we had this pallet of Valiant something forever sitting in our warehouse.
I remember a shop told me once that they knew somebody that ordered so many copies of like a Turok issue from that era that when they didn't sell, they just decided to see if they could make a throne out of it. And so they just made this giant chair just of like not sold or unsold Turok issues. And I remember just thinking, I was like, that is like a visual metaphor for exactly like what people thought they would be getting out of Turok comics and Valiant comics and what actually resulted in it. But I mean, and that's, I do think that's interesting though. So you started up in 1987 and that was right as the boom was starting, and it kind of ended about 1994-ish. And it is interesting because I feel like in a weird way, going through that probably made you realize that you can't overreact to any significant movements, because it's like maybe comics go down for a bit, but typically they'll get back to the level they were at, and maybe they'll spike for a bit, but if you overreact to that, it could eventually backfire as well. It's like, to a certain degree, it's like you almost want to stay even, not to a point where you're robbing yourself of sales, but you want to stay even so you don't like burn yourself.
Well, that is the big trick, because you can been through enough of these that we basically, that's it. We know things can, when they can boom fairly quickly, but when they die, it's now. And you can't, a lot of times, you order months in advance, not just for comics, but for many things. So if it is growing and growing and you're basing your orders on your increased rate, kind of rate of growth, and it dies, and you've got 3 months of that stuff coming in, you could, all that great money you made during the boom, you could lose it with that product coming in. So you really do have to show restraint. It is very hard because you want to just get every penny, and you hate to not have stuff when customers want it. But you got to look at the long run and say, it's small business. We run out of money. We have to go get real jobs. And I don't want that. So it is a real balance, and we don't always hit it. We overorder stuff, and then you see the big sales, or dollar day sales are a great symbol of, oops, missed the mark on some things. So,
what's wild is I've never actually bought a comic from the August sale. I told Pat that, and he was just astonished. I'm not really a back issue guy. I just kind of come in on Wednesdays and I read my comics, and every once in a while I'll get like a MODOK first appearance, but that's about it. But it's weird. But so just a few more questions. I did want to ask about the one thing that does sell comics to me is the employees of Bosco. It's like right off the top of my head, probably the 5 people who, well, the people who are my favorites from over the years, excluding Pat, who's in his own class, are like Jordan, Jared, Will, Megan, and Bailey. And I can tell you that between like Jordan, Will, and Megan, they probably sold me on more comics than any comics marketer or any website ever has. Like those 3 just sold so many comics to me. None of them work there anymore. But at the same time, like, you still have great employees. Like, I love Vaughn. Vaughn is like a treasure. I'm curious as to like how important has it been to the success of Bosco's to not just get good employees, but like, at the beginning we were talking about, there have been ones that have stuck around for 20 plus years. Like, how important is it to have those good employees who are passionate about what they do, but also like getting them to stick around and continue to like be backbones of the Bosco's experience?
I would say that that's about 90% right there, getting good people. And, Eric Helmick has been with me for decades, I think 27th or 28th year now. And he does many things very, very well. But he's been particularly good at hiring people. And he's hired some good people. And, you really need them. If people know the product, love the product, have fun with it. And it's a trick, but I think the people you pointed out were amazing. They still are. They're just not with us, but getting people who are excited about it, but it can also, they're people, they can talk to people and share the excitement. It can be hard to get people like that. And we just try to have a good environment where they get to do what they like, and I think one thing I do, if someone has an idea, hey, we should do this. I go, okay, tell me what you need, and let's see how it goes.
Yeah.
And a lot of times you do something that flops, and that's okay. I don't beat anyone up for making mistakes, because I sure make a lot. And the trick is, if you make a lot of mistakes, learn, move on. But if you do something right, keep doing it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, and repeat. And, and if you do enough things right, it can be 1 out of 10, but those are the things you repeat, and long-term become successful. So, but, anyone can figure out the products. Anyone can buy a fancy building,
But you need people to sell.
And have an environment where they are comfortable and they feel good being there. That's very important.
Mm-hmm. It's funny because one of my favorite things, it's like, I love Free Comic Book Day, and it's always just such a fun day. But for a long time, the dominant memory I had of Free Comic Book Day is walking in. Actually, even before I walk in, because her voice is so powerful for such a small person, Bailey yelling. Bailey would do this game where you roll dice and you can possibly get a free prize or get a discount card. And Bailey would always be the person who runs it. And every time somebody would win, it doesn't matter what they were winning, she would just yell, "We have a winner!" And like you could hear that for like 100 feet out the door, and it was always so spectacular. I don't know. It's funny how like little things like that are the things that stick with you. I told Bailey how much I loved it, but she was just like, "You're ridiculous, Harper."
Yeah, she is an absolute gem. I have enjoyed. She's still part of our team. Really, I saw her just a week or so ago, and she's not working with us, but she may be back. She comes and she goes, and the door's open for her because she's just so special.
Well, and I imagine having people like Eric and Pat and everybody else. I mean, especially, one thing I haven't mentioned is you're not just, the owner of Bosco's, you're an assemblyman here in Anchorage. I imagine knowing that you're going to be busy with that, working until midnight and doing all the things an assemblyman does, knowing that Bosco's is in good hands while you're doing that stuff, that has to be a tremendous weight off your back.
Yeah, I couldn't do it without them. And they've been super patient with me. And, I've been involved with community stuff for decades, and kind of growing. I've, community councils and on the planning commission and things like that for the years. So we're kind of testing the waters. What's it like when John can't be there much, and it's gone well. So before I ran for the assembly, I talked to them, and said, look, this is going to be really hard. I'm not going to be around much. What do we need to do? What work do I do that needs to be moved to someone else? And that didn't totally work real well, but a few things I should still be doing that I don't do anymore. But we talked about it, because I would not be able to do it without their support, and understanding, and they've been tremendous. Mm-hmm. And we've been pretty careful about it. I tell them there's nothing good for Bosco's about me being on the assembly, because, every vote's going to make a lot of people mad, and
right.
That's the way it goes. And so I really try to keep the two separate. You can't always, because people know who I am, and more from Bosco's than from being on the assembly. But it's been pretty good. I avoid politics when I'm in the store. People bring something up. I go, we don't talk that way in this store. Because we're else talk that way. We just don't talk about politics in there. So.
It's funny because, I think like Bailey, my memories of you, at least in recent memory, is like a Free Comic Book Day, because it always seems like you're the person who's like the last person we see before we go in to get comics. That just seems like a role you particularly enjoy.
Oh, well, partly because it's easy and doesn't take much training.
You just have to say hi to people.
Eric has everyone else lined up with their job for the day, and I show up. When I'm there, I don't have scheduled hours. I don't have a particular task to do. So with things like Free Comic Book Day, I just kind of fill in and stuff like that. I mean, I might be out there in the parking lot directing traffic, but that's usually one thing. And I totally enjoy it too, just talking to people in line and so on. So, but I do have been staffing the door to kind of meter people coming in. But in truth, it is because everyone else is doing something that takes a little more skill.
Well, that's good. I'm glad you recognize. Before we close, I want to ask a couple questions about like your 33 years and kind of what you've learned from it. And I'm interested in how, in your mind, how things have changed the most specifically in like the comic side of the business, because, in some ways, like you were talking about the Valiant stuff, you were talking about how there was like that kind of speculator boom that's happening now to a certain degree. Like you're seeing people, apps telling them to go buy comics right now. And then they go in and they, like a locust swarm, buy all the copies of one specific comic. And you're like, where'd that go? And so, like, in some ways, things have weirdly stayed the same. But how do you feel like comics have changed the most since you started up at Bosco's?
Part of it is, price. When they were 60 to 75 cents back when I started, they're very cheap, and people would walk out with stacks of them, and they were less discriminatory about what they were reading. And now that they're, typically $4 a pop, and 6 is not uncommon, people are much more selective. So that's changed a bit. But on the other hand, there's, a wider variety of stories. The quality of the art is better. So there really is, the price has gone up, but to me, it's even a better time to be a comic reader, because there's something for everyone. The mom who would come in and cross her arms while she's holding her checkbook for Tommy while he's getting his comics. If I see something like that now, I take her over and show her some graphic novels. And I just ask, what do you read? I don't read comics. Well, what do you read? And she'll say, well, I read different books. But she'll say, but they're books, And I say, okay, so you like history. Oh, yeah, so what do you read? Oh, that's great. Oh, no kidding. Let me show you one. So I'll show them, because there's so many comics that you say, what do you like to read? Whatever topic it might be, there's a comic for it. So people, some of these travel ones, like Guy Delisle or something, I don't remember his name. But
Guy Delisle, yeah.
They read. Delisle, yeah, they're great. Have you ever talked to them? Tell them I love his books, And I can get moms reading comics who aren't comic readers. They look at that. Persepolis, of course, is a great one to open the door. And, Bone is good for all ages. You show someone Bone, and it's beautiful. It's fun to read. There's just so many different books like that we just didn't have back in the 80s and in the 90s so much. And we did some. Watchmen is kind of a select market, but clearly it's a huge market,
right,
because it's been so successful for so long. And, that came out back then, So there were some really strong things coming out then, but it wasn't as pervasive as it is now. So that's tremendous. And, of course, graphic novels over floppies. It was all floppies back then. Now with graphic novels there, in Barnes & Noble, that's kind of competition for me in a way. But for a lot of people, it legitimized comics because of their Barnes & Noble. And then, and I'll tell you, when we moved 1987 across the street from the little shop into this new huge shop and set it up, and at the shop prior, when we left, there were posters in the windows. You couldn't see outside at all, and they were worn, they were faded. It was terrible. So I had no posters in the windows ever since then. We don't put posters on a window. But one of my customers talked to me. He said, when are you putting the posters in the window? I said, well, we're not. I want to be bright and happy. I want people to drive by seeing people shopping. He goes, I don't want people to see me shopping here. This is an adult embarrassed to be a comic reader. And librarians were our worst enemy because they wouldn't have comics in their libraries because they want real books. Well, that has changed completely. Now, we work so closely with the library on Free Comic Book Day, Reading Rendezvous, anything they do, we're there. And we work together with them tremendously. And they love comics. They love graphic novels. They love manga. And that is so different from what it was, 30 years ago. And it's amazing, and it should be that way. And we have fought that battle. We used to go to librarians and teach them about comics and do our, Scott McCloud Light, Understanding Comics Light. And we don't have to now because they understand them. And it's the world accepts comics. It's amazing. It really has changed tremendously. And I think we're on the route. If you look at other countries, like Japan, everyone reads comics.
Right.
They're not anywhere near that. So the growth in the industry here the potential is vast.
Yeah. Well, and a lot of it is coming from the same things that are thriving at libraries, which is graphic novels, particularly for kids. And it's really interesting. I did this big feature on libraries last year where I talked to the American Library Association and librarians from around the country and some like the big publishers and stuff like that. And it is really interesting to talk to them because when in 1987, you were talking about how they were just adamantly against comics. Now, librarians are probably maybe the biggest advocates comics have, which is really Like that is a sea change. That is unbelievable. And I do think, like I said, a lot of it comes with that. It's kind of like in some ways, besides the price part, it's like all of these different things connect with each other. The rise of graphic novels made it easier for librarians to support them. And then on top of that, the diversification of all the genres and all the stories that are being told makes it more appealing to a wider audience. So the librarians have something to pitch. It's really cool how all those things kind of grow simultaneously.
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
But so, okay, like I said, you've been in business for 33 years through good times and bad. I mean, you've seen everything in comics. Like the 90s by itself was just like a roller coaster ride. Why do you think comics have been so lasting, in your opinion?
It kind of goes back to Scott McCloud. This started with hieroglyphs in Egypt. I mean, that's how it's a way of telling stories, and as humans like to tell stories. And they're not just words on paper, art, and not just the art, but the layout of the comic, all the pieces that make a comic a storytelling form. People love to tell stories, and using comics is, just one way of doing that. And it's, so powerful. I just think they'll be around forever. I don't see how you could not have comics. And, I never challenged, will they all be digital? And I think we'll see more and more of that because it's easier and cheaper. But, people like to hold things in their hands too. We're also kind of, as creatures, we're inclined to want to be that way.
Well, it's kind of like what you were saying earlier about the, about like the Babe Ruth cards and stuff like that. And I was talking about my spinner rack of comics and everything. I do think that one thing that's interesting is even if there's digital, like you look at some of the stuff that's happening at DC right now, and I don't know how familiar you are with all of it, but one of the things that it sounds like they're doing is like to a certain degree, a greater focus on digital, but also on graphic novels, like the collections and everything. So it's like, just because comics are going to go digital to a certain degree doesn't mean that there won't be physical collections later that end up being very interesting to readers that prefer the print product. I mean, there can be a positive give and take there, I think.
Yeah, we'll watch it and we'll just learn as the market moves. Everything in this world moves towards efficiency, and you have to be prepared for it. And if it's not what you're used to or not what you want in the world of business, tough luck. Mm-hmm. Figure out how to make it, and I think the recent moves with DC Dump and Diamond, it's been very expensive for us. We were talking about shipping, and that has been brutal. We haven't figured out how to make money on DC Comics right now. Mm-hmm. But we'll still carry them. We have to have them, So we'll figure it. We'll just figure it out. One of the things, if they test things online and then just print and hard copy the things that do well, that kind of helps us in a way, because then we don't have to experiment with the slow stuff. We only get the stuff we know is good.
Yeah, they're market testing for you. Yeah,
essentially. So help us a little. That R&D side might get easy.
Okay, well, the last thing I want to close with is, I mentioned over email that I was hoping that you might have some favorite memories from your time running Bosco's, and you already shared a couple. I'm just curious, like, if there's one thing that, maybe not the one thing, but like a story that represents, why you've loved your time running Bosco's, what's a story you would have for me?
Boy, the whole ride has been pretty good. It's ups and downs, challenging at times. We'd overorder stuff, run out of money. Run out of money is bad. But I would say, we had worked really hard to kind of build a business over the years and so on, and finding a new building that would really let us do it right. And, 6 or 7 years ago, I found this old car wash. It was a derelict building. It was a blight in Spenard, and, managed to work out a deal to buy it and figure out how to, got the loan to rebuild it. And, it was the grand opening then, and we, had a lot going on. It was kind of like the free comic book day thing. We had a band there. We had the Spinards and, cosplay, and we wanted to do something a little different than a ribbon cutting. We blew up a huge cover of a D&D book with a dragon with flames flying out, and we did a contest for who will wield this sword to slay the dragon and open the door to this new store. And it happened to be a former employee won, and she dressed the part. Her son was there, her husband was there, and we had a huge crowd. You know, we had over 100 people, and it had just snowed like a foot. We still had a big crowd, and you know, the media was there, and it was, you know, we gave a little speech, you know, talking about it, and she swings the sword and slices this dragon perfectly, opening the way to the door, and she closes out her swing. She loses the sword right towards the crowd. And perhaps my happiest moment was it landed on the ground and not in someone. It wasn't just that the theater of the moment worked so beautifully, and it was so much fun for everyone there, but it really was, we had, it you know, in my little speech was, you know, geeks and nerds and that whole thing were kind of beat down and hidden, like that guy who didn't want to be seen shopping there. But at that moment, we were right out there in public, media, 100 plus people there in the cold, because all this stuff is accepted now, you know, as being just fun. And there's nothing wrong with having fun with this stuff. And that moment just brought it together. And, you know, and this 5.5 years ago. We're doing great in the new building, you know, which was a gamble, you know, it was a huge amount of money. And but we're doing well, and but that, it was a turning point. It was just so exciting.
Yeah, I remember that day. That was a great day, and this was a great chat too. Unfortunately, that's all I have for you, John. Thank you so much for coming on to talk about Bosco's, its history, comics, and everything else. I appreciate you taking the time.
It was a pleasure, and you know, Bosco's is here because people like you, you know, our customers. You know, couldn't do it without you.
Before we go, I want to give a quick shout out to a very special patron, Sean Kirkham, with another edition of Off Panel's Beast of the Week. This segment is built to highlight someone or something in comics I've been impressed by recently, earning them the position as the podcast Beast of the Week. This week, I want to give a shout out to all the great comic shops I've visited over the years around the world. Bosco's Comics, Big Bang Comics, Awesome Books and Comics, Books with Pictures, Floating World, Gosh Comics, Golden Age Collectibles, and many, many others help make me the comic fan I am today, and it's because of the work of the teams that make them what they are. So thanks for the amazing work, retailers. You all are my Beasts of the Week. Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Off Panel with retailer John Weddleton. You can find him at Bosco's Comics, Cards, and Games in Anchorage, Alaska. Off Panel is brought to you by Sketch.com. Check out Sketched, my subscription comic site, for long-form articles, interviews, and more. And consider subscribing for access to all of that content and its members-only forum. If you're a fan of Off Panel, make sure to check it out on Patreon. If you back the show on there, you not only support it, but you get early access to each week's podcast, access to weekly content, and more. Also, don't forget to subscribe to Off Panel on iTunes or Spotify, and give the show a rating and review while you're at it. You can find Off Panel and Sketched on social media by liking it on Facebook at /Sketched. That's SKTCHD. Following it on Twitter and Instagram at @SketchComic, or following me at @SliceFriedGold. Big thanks to all my existing patrons, including SB, Antonio Offen, Nick Bennett, Daniel Whitfield, Scotty Young, Susanna Polo, Jeff Rivera, Reed Hinkley Barnes, Mario Tianbang, AbductedTheComic.com, Andrew Carita, Matt Mahoney, Charlie Chu, Stephen Hall, Pensacola Pop Comics, Kim Eslin, Philip Myra, Christian Shelton, Kenny Porter, Chris Pacello, Torrin Grunbeck, Fuzz Bubbles, Chris Rata, Transmitter Down, Waltz Comics and Books, Carl Mizell, Danny Ollie, Paul Slates, Akil Wilson, Alex Dimitriopoulos, Terry Dodson, Liana Kingus, Keegan Ray, Milton Lawson, Wesley Gift, Sean Kirkham, Harry Small, Alistair Ross, Julio Anta, Brett A. Schmidt, Jason Goodmanson, Paul Ranwan, Vita Ayala, Tarek Ferguson, Dave Slusher, W&Q Comics, Akil Kokachi, Phil White, Sean Pinello, Ken Heidelman, Philip Seavey, Al Ewing, Ryan Alcock, Nick Michelin, David Kelly, Robert Wilson IV, Nick Polito, Owen McCready, Brendan Fletcher, Gary Maloney, Jonathan Nilsson, Matthew Groom, Jason Massey, Adam Bogart, Xavier Files, Matthew Taylor, Nick Patera, Jacob Sorelli, Ford Gilmore, David Baraldi, Nick Hall, Bjorn Basin, John Hendricks, Steve Anderson, E. Maxwell, Cliff Chang, Benjamin Shipper, Carl McMahon, Chris Palmer, Scott McGovern, Nathan Fairbairn, Cap McKenzie, Adam Heifel, Fiona Staples, Chris O'Halloran, Mark Abnett, Mike Murphy, Michael Shirley, Tom Barnett, Jim Debenacos, Norbert, Nick Lowe, James Kaplan, and Mission Comics and Art in San Francisco. You guys are all the best. A quick thanks to Upright T-Rex Music, who wrote and performed Off Panel's theme song just for the show. Check out their music on Spotify because it's completely delightful. Thanks for listening, and tune in next week for another episode.